Hello everyone, peace be upon you. Before we begin, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe, and stay with me until the end of the story. Also, leave a comment telling me which city and country you're watching from. I'd love to see how far my story has reached. For those of you who have already subscribed, I sincerely wish you good health, ease in all your affairs, abundant blessings, and may all your hopes and dreams come true. Amen. Now, let's begin the story. The basement of the San Diego Veterans Community Center hummed with tired fluorescent light as 12 folding chairs formed a loose circle on the concrete floor, and Dr. Evelyn Moore called the meeting to order in that steady voice everyone knew meant the room was safe for hard truths, and Sarah Coleman sat 2 seats to her left like she always did, back straight, hands still, denim jacket worn to a soft fade with a tiny trident pin that caught the light when she shifted but drew no comment. Because no one ever asked about it directly, not even Maria Alvarez, who watched everything with sharp eyes and the habit of keeping her back near a wall, or Jared Whitaker, whose knee bounced so fast it rattled the metal chair legs, or Raymond Cutter, who filled his seat like a boulder, jaw set, arms crossed, gaze fixed too long on Sarah's collar as if the pin itself offended him. Evelyn started with breathing, 4 in, 6 out, feet flat, name one thing you can see, one thing you can touch, one sound in the room that isn't your fear, and the group followed, some better than others, and Sarah took it with them, eyes sweeping the room the way someone scans for exits without making a show of it, counting the tells, Jared's tremor, Maria's clenched jaw, Ray's heat rising in his neck. Like she'd been trained to watch people, because sometimes watching people kept everyone alive. When it came time to share, Maria went first, talking about a night shift at the shelter, a drunk yelling in the lobby, hands in his pockets like he might pull a blade, the way her chest locked because it looked like a hallway from years she didn't talk about, and Evelyn guided her out of the loop without pressing for details, while Sarah listened and said only a few words when it helped, never more, never less, like she'd practiced the weight of sentences. Jared's turn came slower. He tried to skip, then apologized for apologizing, and the room chuckled softly in a way that didn't sting, and he finally said he still couldn't sit near windows because of a day that started with a convoy brief and ended with a smell he couldn't scrub out of his lungs, and Sarah's eyes softened a fraction, a small signal he caught and held like a rope. Ray didn't share. He cleared his throat and said, pass, but he didn't look down. He looked at Sarah's jacket again, and whatever he was thinking hardened into something that waited for an excuse. Evelyn wrapped the first round and moved to skills, grounding, anchor phrases, what to tell your nervous system when the past tries to walk you out of the room, and she asked Sarah, if she was comfortable, to demonstrate the hand pressure technique she'd shown a month ago, and Sarah declined politely this time, said words work too, let's practice a script you can use at 3 a.m., and she gave them a simple line, I'm in this room, this is my chair, that sound is the HVAC, my hands are warmer than they were a minute ago, and had everyone repeat it until the air stopped buzzing so loud. The door opened once during the session. Sergeant Michael Torres from LAPD Central Division stuck his head in to check on room access for a later event and gave a quick nod to Evelyn. He volunteered here sometimes when he could, and his eyes flicked across the circle, pausing a beat on Sarah like people do when they're trying to place a face they've seen only in passing. Then he was gone and the hum settled again. When the break came, Maria poured coffee and asked Jared about a community college class he'd been avoiding. He said maybe this semester, maybe, and smiled like it hurt less than last week, and Ray stood apart near the bulletin board, reading the flyer about stolen valor is a crime, for longer than anyone needed to read a flyer, the words about federal penalties underlined in red ink that had faded to pink. Sarah took the last chair before the circle reformed, hands still, eyes on Evelyn, but when Jared returned from the restroom his breathing had changed, quick and high, and his fingers kept touching his boot like an old habit he didn't know he still had, and Sarah clocked it without looking like she clocked it, the way you notice a ticking sound you've trained yourself to hear. Evelyn shifted to triggers and made it practical. What do you do at the grocery store when the aisle is crowded? What do you do in traffic when the horn hits the wrong memory? And she asked Jared about sleep, and the floor moved a little under him, and he muttered something about the convoy again, a smell of burning metal, a name he wouldn't say, and the room tightened as if everyone had felt a cold draft from a door that wasn't open. Sarah leaned forward a half-inch, not enough to spook him, and said his name once, calm and firm, a tone that meant here and now, and Jared blinked hard and found her in the fog like people find a lighthouse by sound. Ray exhaled through his nose, looked at the pin again, and whatever story he'd been telling himself about who gets to wear what and why stitched itself tighter across his face. The meeting wound down with Evelyn assigning small homework: write the anchor phrase on a card, tape it to the bathroom mirror, text someone when you wake up sweating, and chairs scraped concrete and paper cups hit the trash, and the hum felt less harsh when voices filled the room, and yet there was a current under it, faint but live, that ran from Ray's fixed stare to the pin on Sarah's collar and back to the flyer with the red underline. And Sarah felt it like she could sense weather before it changed. Outside, evening dragged a marine layer over the neighborhood, headlights smeared on damp pavement, and someone's car alarm chirped twice in the lot, and inside the basement the air cooled as the door kept opening and closing with people saying goodnight. Evelyn asked Sarah to lock up after she finished the sign-in sheet, and Sarah said sure, and Maria told Jared she'd walk him to the bus stop so he wouldn't talk himself out of going home, and Ray lingered near the table where the coffee had burned low in the pot, eyes still on the small gold trident as if the metal itself could answer a question he hadn't asked out loud. Sarah slipped the key ring into her pocket, flipped the light switches halfway so the room fell into a softer dim, and took one more look at the circle of chairs, the way they always looked slightly crooked after a hard meeting, as if recovery rarely moved in straight lines, and she told herself the same phrase she gave the room: this is my chair, this is this moment, that sound is just the HVAC, and decided for now that was enough. Unaware that upstairs, 2 floors and a world away, a rumor had already started traveling about a woman with a quiet voice and a fast pair of hands who wore a pin some people said she had no right to wear, a rumor that would find its way to a detective named Lauren Vega before the week was over and change the temperature of every room Sarah walked into. That rumor found Detective Lauren Vega on a Tuesday afternoon, folded into a quick voicemail from a patrol sergeant who said a quiet lady with a seal pin had calmed a near riot in a basement on B Street, and maybe it was nothing, but maybe it wasn't, and Lauren wrote the note: community center, veterans group, possible impersonation, then moved on because paperwork didn't care about rumors. By Thursday evening the rumor had legs. The basement lights buzzed, the circle reformed, and the air felt charged like the moment before rain. Evelyn opened with breath work, Maria kept her back to the wall out of habit, Jared looked tired but present, Ray's eyes were flint. Sarah sat the same way she always did, still as a coiled line that wasn't threatening anyone until it had to be. The first 20 minutes were fine, small wins, a joke about decaf, the soft laughter that made the concrete feel less hard, until the building coughed a harsh metallic bang from the old boiler and Jared's head snapped up like a wire had been yanked inside his skull. He whispered sorry to no one, hands searching his boot like muscle memory knew a map his mind didn't, and the room tilted. Evelyn said his name once, calm, the way she'd taught herself to do, but the past was already pouring through the crack. Jared stood without deciding to, eyes fixed on something that wasn't there, breath coming fast, voice saying get down in a tone that pulled everyone's stomach to the floor. A small knife flashed out of his boot like a bad reflex. Chairs screeched. Maria grabbed a chair back with white knuckles. Ray froze for half a beat, then stepped forward out of instinct without a plan. Sarah moved first. It wasn't dramatic, it was geometry. 2 steps, left hand finding Jared's wrist at the nerve bundle, right arm guiding his spine back into the vector of the bench, breath steady, voice lower than the panic. You're here, Jared. You smell coffee. You hear the fan. The convoy made it. Jackson's alive. The blade hit concrete and spun. The room came back in pieces, the buzz, someone's breath hitching, Evelyn's hand hovering over the panic button and then pulling back. 90 seconds. That's all it took. Jared sagged and sobbed into his hands and Sarah kept one palm on his shoulder so he had a place to put gravity. Evelyn exhaled like she'd been holding a wall by herself. Thank you, she said, and it meant more than gratitude, it meant we are not going to lose him tonight. The door at the top of the stairs had been propped open for airflow, and 3 people in the hallway had seen just enough of the blur to become narrators. One had a phone. A 30-second clip climbed to the internet before the group had finished picking up the fallen chair. Ray watched Sarah hand Jared water and something in him boiled over, not at the crisis but at the calm, at the pin that caught the fluorescent light like a dare. "Stolen valor," he said, not loud but hard, and the words sucked breath from the room. He pointed to the trident. "You don't get to wear that. Not you. Not now. Not ever." Sarah didn't flinch. "It's a gift," she said, voice even. "From someone who earned it. If it's a problem, I'll remove it here." She reached to unpin it, half turn, small click of metal, as if to say the room mattered more than any symbol. Ray's face flushed deeper. "You're lying to vets in a support group," he snapped, phone already in his hand, thumb shaking over 911 because the flyer on the board had fed his anger all week. Evelyn stepped in. "Ray, not here, not like this," but he was already talking to the operator, voice formal now, reporting a crime like he was building a wall around his shame. 10 minutes later, 2 uniforms from Central Division were coming down the stairs with Torres behind them, eyes wide because he'd liked the quiet of this group and the last thing he wanted was to turn it into a scene. Sirens didn't scream, policy didn't allow it for a call like this. The real noise came from outside, the clip pinging phones, comments blooming like mold, someone typing, "She moves like a pro," while another typed, "Fake." The officers were polite, almost apologetic. "Ma'am, we need to ask you a few questions upstairs." Sarah nodded, told Evelyn she'd be right back, told Jared to breathe with the wall, in for 4, out for 6, like they practiced, told Maria she had good instincts and to trust them. Ray stood off to the side, suddenly smaller, something like regret flickering because consequences had a way of feeling different once they stepped into the room. In the corridor Lauren arrived, hair pulled back, badge clipped to the belt of a blazer that had seen too many double shifts this month. She'd been 2 blocks away when the call came through, possible impersonation, disturbance contained, voluntary escort. She met Sarah on the stairs, introduced herself, voice even, eyes taking in posture, hands, the way muscles rest when they've been trained to move. They walked to a small office upstairs that smelled like carpet cleaner and tired plans. Lauren opened a laptop, typed the name Sarah gave, and watched a basic Navy record load like a door that wasn't meant to open. Enlistment, check. Training, check. Then a quiet expanse of black bars that might as well have been a hand over the screen. Administrative separation, no detail. No commendations attached, no deployments listed, no ordinary clutter of a career. Lauren felt the hairs on her arms lift the way they did when a case wasn't what it said it was. She closed the laptop and looked at Sarah the way you look at a puzzle that is missing pieces and still tells a picture. Downstairs, the group tried to pretend the room hadn't tilted. Evelyn kept them breathing, Maria remained standing because chairs sometimes made her feel trapped, Jared cried and didn't apologize for it, and Ray stared at the empty chair where Sarah had been like it could testify against him or for him depending on what he needed. Outside, the clip found a bigger account, and the caption, "Who is she?" started to trend in a small corner of town. Torres texted his watch commander and got a neutral reply that meant do it by the book. Lauren asked one more question, felt the answer land soft and heavy, and decided the interview needed a room with a camera and a clock. She told Sarah she was going to detain her for impersonation pending verification, used the exact words policy required, watched for reaction, saw none. Sarah didn't argue. She slid the unpinned trident across the desk like a coin no one was allowed to spend and stood, hands visible, the way people do when they know how a script goes. As Torres escorted her toward the elevator, his voice low with apology Sarah didn't need, the hallway lights hummed a little louder, and a thin thread of pressure stretched from a community center basement to Central Division, to a desk at Naval Base Coronado where a name would hit a secure line before midnight and draw a map of consequences no one in that building was ready to read. That map of consequences began to draw itself the moment Lauren signed the intake form and watched booking swallow Sarah's fingerprints like the system was tasting something it didn't know how to digest, and by the time the elevator doors closed on the ride to the interview floor, the thin thread from Coronado had already tightened enough to make the air feel denser. The interview room was a metal table, 2 chairs, a clock that ticked louder than it should, and a camera with a red dot that made everyone sit straighter. Lauren read the script she had to read: name, date of birth, statement of probable cause, then pushed a bottle of water across the table and opened her laptop to a personnel portal that flashed green, then gray, then threw up a wall of redactions you could drown in. Enlistment dates, training at Great Lakes, then black ink silence. No ribbons, no deployments, an administrative separation that explained nothing. She watched Sarah more than the screen, the way her shoulders stayed loose, the way her eyes never challenged and never fled, a kind of quiet that wasn't submission but discipline. Why the pin? Lauren asked finally, and Sarah said it had been given to her, and that if its presence hurt the room, she didn't need it, and the answer was so clean it irritated the part of Lauren that counted tells. She pivoted. Where did you learn to break panic that fast? Sarah's eyes flicked once to the clock and back. High-stress extractions, she said, and the word choice landed with a weight the room felt. Lauren leaned in without moving. There's no record of you in any high-stress anything. Sarah breathed once, slow. That's kind of the point. The camera clicked in the quiet, a mechanical blink. Downstairs, Torres watched holding Phil with the usual, a drunk who wanted to fight his reflection, a shoplifter gone belligerent, Maria on a bench because she refused to leave Jared alone at the precinct and said fine, book me for loitering if you have to, I'm staying. Sarah passed through the processing gate with the same unruffled stillness she had in the basement, and when a young guy in the next cell started hyperventilating at the clank of the door, she slid to the bars and spoke low, not therapy talk, just simple anchors. Name 3 things you can see, say them out loud, count your breaths back from 10, and Torres, who had seen every flavor of panic, watched the kid's hand stop shaking and wrote a note he didn't know where to file: detainee de-escalated. Another detainee with words. Upstairs, Lauren shifted tactics. She closed the laptop and said, off the record, convince me you're not stealing a story you read somewhere. Sarah didn't rush. She described a tunnel beneath downtown Los Angeles that smelled like rust and old rain and the faint sweet metal tang of the wrong isotope packed in a lead case, a countdown that had been shoved forward 6 hours because cowards love surprise, the way your hands shake the least when you've accepted you might not see daylight if you cut the wrong line. She didn't say cesium, she didn't say device design, she just named the shape of fear like someone who had made a quiet peace with it and then walked through it anyway. Lauren's pen stopped writing. That's not in any report, she said, because she knew, she'd caught a sideways briefing months ago, a customs matter, that smelled like federal disinfectant. Sarah rolled up a sleeve to scratch a scar on her shoulder, an absent gesture that put pale surgical tracks in the fluorescent light, and Lauren had to look away because the body doesn't lie as easily as a file does. The laptop buzzed. A message from an admin at the military liaison desk telling her politely to stand down pending verification from appropriate authorities, language that usually meant someone with more stars than she had stripes was about to rearrange her night. Another buzz, a clip on her phone, muted, the basement scene in ugly hallway video, blur of motion, hand to wrist, knife spinning to concrete, already on a mid-level aggregator with a caption that said who is SHE and comments that split into worship and contempt at machine speed. Across town, Sage Tran's phone lit up with the same clip and a 3-line tip from a source with no name: check Central Division booking log, female, 30s, Navy history, blank, and Sage's curiosity pulled taut because she'd chased enough ghosts to know when one was worth running after. Back in the room, Lauren drew a line she knew could get her burned and crossed it. If I call someone at Coronado and use a phrase, will it mean anything to them? Sarah's voice dropped half a degree. Depends on the phrase. Lauren waited. Sarah gave her 2 words, quiet as a password. The sound of them made the red dot on the camera seem brighter. Torres escorted Sarah to holding while Lauren made the call from a desk phone she trusted more than her cell, asked for a rank she didn't have the right to ask for, used the phrase exactly as it had been given, and listened to 3 seconds of silence heavy enough to press a dent in the day before the voice on the other end told her not to move, not to close the interview, not to make another copy of anything. When she hung up, she understood just how far out of her depth she'd stepped. In holding, Maria slid closer to Sarah's cell and asked if Jared would be okay. He will if he follows the plan, Sarah said, and gave her a simple script to hand him when he came down from the crash. Ray called twice, then hung up before it connected, paced his apartment, stared at the paused frame of the clip where Sarah's hand blurred and wondered, with a sour pit in his gut, whether he'd made the worst call of his life. Sage wrote 4 paragraphs she knew would get scrubbed and hit publish anyway because a story wanted air even if it only breathed for 5 minutes. The post lasted 7. By the time Lauren walked back to holding to advise Sarah of formal detention for impersonation pending verification, Torres had already clocked 2 suits in the lobby with eyes that didn't belong to city government and a sign-in sheet that had started collecting names he couldn't read. Lauren opened the door, said the words policy required, watched Sarah nod once, and all at once the station felt too small for what was coming, as if the thin thread from Coronado had thickened into a cable that could pull the building off its foundation. The lobby doors swung open and Admiral Thomas Harrington walked in like a storm front with 4 plainclothes heavies forming a moving perimeter, and the room immediately learned the difference between authority and rank. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He showed a leather folder to the desk sergeant, and whatever the sergeant was about to say died under the weight of classification stamps that did not belong inside a city precinct. Torres stepped forward out of reflex, then stepped back because the Admiral's eyes said "Not now, officer," and Lauren came off the stairs with her badge already visible and 1,000 questions she knew she might never be allowed to ask. "Detective Vega," Harrington said, reading her nameplate without looking at her like he already had her file, "you will take me to the detainee, and you will not discuss this case with anyone until you receive written authorization from my office." His tone was a locked door. Lauren hated locked doors. She led him toward holding anyway because the hall cameras were rolling and she wasn't going to make this a hallway fight. The suits peeled off to secure corners, speaking into mics no one else could hear. In the cell block, Maria stood when she saw the uniforms and the suits, protective even behind bars. Torres told her softly to sit, that none of this was about her. Sarah rose from the bench and did nothing dramatic, no salute, no barked "sir," just a small nod that said she understood the choreography of problems bigger than rooms. The Admiral looked at her for one long beat, something like relief cutting across a face that did not show many human things in public, then he turned to Lauren. "This individual is under federal protection," he said. "Your charge will be withdrawn. Your booking will be sealed. Your entire contact with this detainee is now classified. You will give me every copy of every recording and every note you made." Lauren held his stare and said she would comply and also needed a written order for chain of custody. It wasn't defiance so much as survival. "You'll have it before you print," he said, and the promise sounded like a threat to the printer. He stepped to the cell and spoke lower. "Coleman." Sarah's answer was steady. "Sir." He studied her face like he was confirming the shape of a word he'd kept off paper. "We're burning the identity," he said. "Now." No anger in it, only the cost. "Understood," she said, and there was a quiet grief in that word for everything she'd built between Thursday nights and grocery store lines. Torres unlocked the door while the suits drew a soft human wall around the corridor so nothing stupid would happen in a 10-second window. As Sarah stepped out, a shout pushed through the lobby glass. Ray Cutter was at the door, breath fogging the pain, palms up, not aggressive, just desperate. "Please," he said to the suits who were already saying no, "I need 30 seconds." The Admiral's jaw worked once like he was chewing on protocol. Sarah caught the motion and shook her head a fraction. "Let him," she said. Harrington flicked 2 fingers and the suits parted just enough for Ray to stumble in, eyes red in a way he'd never allow at group. He stopped a foot from Sarah and couldn't look at her hands. "I was wrong," he said, voice scraped raw. "I thought I was protecting something. I was protecting my own pride." He swallowed hard. "I called because I saw the pin. I didn't see what you did for Jared. I didn't see the room." Sarah placed a hand on his shoulder, the lightest contact, like she was returning gravity to where it belonged. "Make it count," she said. "Show up. Help Evelyn keep the floor steady. Teach the room you can be wrong and still be useful." Ray nodded with his whole body, like a man who had just been handed a mission that might save him. The moment broke as two new suits arrived from the elevator with a weather system of urgency around them, phones buzzing, phrases like perimeter sweep and extraction window and chatter uptick hitting ears that weren't supposed to hear them. Harrington looked at Lauren. "Detective, you will ride with us to witness transfer. After that, you'll get your paper. You've handled yourself correctly." It came out almost like respect. She wasn't sure if she wanted it. They moved. The hallway seemed narrower under the weight of logistics. Torres took point to clear the path he'd walked 100 times with drunks and purse thieves and never with an asset whose existence carried its own gravity well. At the Sally Port, black SUVs idled, exhaust ghosting in the sodium light, doors open, radios low. A convoy like this draws eyes. The Admiral knew it, the suits knew it, and somewhere across town someone else knew it too, because Lauren's phone vibrated with a push alert from a burner press list she kept for work. Short post, already vanishing, headline half scrubbed, "She's not fake. She's the ghost," pulled down 2 minutes later with a 404 and a taste of something metallic in the back of the throat. They loaded fast. Sarah slid into the middle bench, Harrington across, Lauren beside him, one suit up front scanning mirrors, another on comms reading traffic like a flight plan. Doors thumped shut and the convoy rolled, quiet as a hand closing over a candle. For 3 blocks nobody spoke. Then Harrington said, not to the room but to the problem, "You saved my son," like a man paying a debt he couldn't square with medals. Sarah didn't nod and didn't look away. "He saved himself," she said. "I just took a few pieces off the board." Lauren watched their faces in the reflection, two people who had shared things she would never read in a report, and wondered what part of this would be allowed to matter by morning. In the rear view she caught headlights peeling off the main road, then rejoining, nothing dramatic, just the kind of tale a civilian wouldn't clock and a professional would. The lead driver said traffic's light, then adjusted speed by 2 miles an hour in a way that told the convoy to tighten. Harrington tapped a phone and gave a call sign that didn't belong to any unit she'd ever liaised with, and a voice came back clear and calm, "Route clean to the ramp, package secure," chatter elevated but unfocused. Sarah looked out at Los Angeles sliding past, the gas stations and strip malls and midnight dog walkers who had no idea a quiet woman losing her name was passing by, and exhaled. "Tell Evelyn," she said to Lauren, eyes still on the glass, "to teach the hand anchor to Maria. She'll do it better than I did in 6 weeks." Lauren said she would. She meant it. The convoy hit the freeway, lights off pattern, and for a moment it felt like the city let go of them. Then a buzz at Harrington's hip shot a ripple down the bench. He read the screen, face a shade colder. "Leak widened," he said. "We're moving her tonight." "Where?" Lauren asked, because she asked things. "Nevada," he said. "A place that doesn't have a name you can write down." He turned back to Sarah. "Everything you built here was meant to be borrowed," she said, and she didn't say it like a tragedy. She said it like a fact you make peace with so it doesn't own you. In the mirror, a pair of headlights gave up and drifted away. The convoy slid east, a dark thread stitching the night to a desert where identities go to cool, and in a precinct they'd left behind a desk printer woke up to spit out the first page of the order Lauren had requested, ink barely dry on words that would seal a story even as the internet tried to pry it open with bare hands. The convoy kept sliding east, and Harrington's phone lit the cabin with short updates that sounded like weather reports for a storm only 5 people could see. Lauren scanned the passing signs, measuring miles to the state line, while Sarah rested her forearms on her knees the way tired athletes do between rounds, conserving energy without letting her guard drop. "We'll hit Coronado first," Harrington said, 15 minutes only, and the driver adjusted the route without comment. They swung south before dawn bled into the sky and rolled through the gate at Naval Base Coronado under a guard change that looked routine to anyone not reading the cadence. Inside a secure office with a window that faced a flagpole and nothing else, a duty officer took custody of the sealed interview drive from Central Division and logged it with a signature that would never hit a public docket. Lauren watched the chain of custody move like a small train on a short track, precise and unhurried, and felt a pressure she hadn't named let up an inch because someone was finally carrying the box who wouldn't drop it. Harrington slid a folder across the table toward her, formal instruction with citation lines, classification blocks where the case number should be, a paragraph that said you will not discuss this matter outside approved channels, and she signed because procedure was a life raft when everything else felt improvised. In the next room, a technician processed a cutout packet, new ID draft, temporary medical file, relocation baseline. Sarah didn't look at the new name. "We'll assign it in the air," Harrington said. "You won't have to speak it until you land." She gave a quick nod that looked like gratitude and grief got the same small space for now. Torres called in from Los Angeles with a brief that made Lauren close her eyes. Maria and Jared had made it home, the group room had been sanitized, Evelyn had a list of immediate referrals, Ray had shown up before sunrise to help stack chairs and said nothing to anyone, which was its own apology. "Tell Evelyn the hand anchor is hers," Sarah said to Lauren, "and tell Maria she's not a placeholder, she's the point," and Lauren wrote the lines in a notebook she wasn't sure she was legally allowed to keep. A liaison from base security gave Lauren a document she could hand her captain, external incident under federal review, local department cooperated fully, no further action required. It read like a pat on the head, it felt like a shield her team needed to keep doing their actual jobs. The last loose ends began to tuck themselves down. A quiet car took Lauren back to Central Division to brief the captain under the new constraints. A legal officer from the base rode along to collect printed copies and confirm drive handovers. In a hallway that still smelled like last night's coffee, Lauren found Torres and handed him a short list, off-record safety advisories for anyone who'd been in contact with Sarah since the video. "Nothing dramatic," she told him. "Just eyes up for a week. If they see something, call us, not the internet." He nodded like a man who had already started the work. Across town, Sage Tran sat in a diner stirring cold coffee and refreshing screens that now said, "Content unavailable." She still had her notes, scraps of transcript from a source who texted like they were typing with their left hand while sweeping their right for tails. She knew she could push again and watch it vanish again. Instead she wrote a private memo to herself, "Protect the civilians in the basement first, the story will keep, truth is worthless if the wrong people get hurt." She closed the laptop and walked to the community center to drop off a list of trauma clinic numbers on Evelyn's desk with no byline attached. Back at Coronado, Harrington stood with Sarah on a small balcony that faced the flag and the water beyond the fence. "You did what we asked," he said, not a compliment, just a ledger line. "You did more than we had a right to ask." Sarah kept her eyes on the quiet base traffic. "They're going to be okay," she said, and it was unclear whether she meant the country or the 12 people in a basement. "What about you?" he asked. She half smiled. "I've done this part before." A transport waited on a separate tarmac with no markings that mattered. A medic checked her shoulder scars like you check old injuries before another long drive. A comms tech handed her a small phone with no contacts and one number under emergency. Harrington offered a hand, she took it. "If the new place needs a basement," he said, "we'll find you one." She nodded once, not trusting her voice. Lauren met her by the door and handed over a folded note on precinct paper. "From Evelyn," she said. "Just a grounding script for airplanes." Sarah tucked it into her jacket, the denim now missing the small weight on the collar, and the absence felt like when you pat a pocket and know you left something behind on purpose. Wheels Up came gentle, not like the movies, and the base shrank under them until the city was just a loose grid and then a smear and then desert. In the air, the plan unspooled in short, practical lines. Nevada intake at a safe house outside a town with 2 gas stations, 2 weeks dark, new employment cover set to populate, check-ins every 48 hours through a rotating cutout. Sarah asked one question, "The group?" Harrington answered without looking up from the packet. "Protected." Quietly. "We've already flagged their names. If anyone asks, they're witnesses in an unrelated case. It's enough fog to keep them out of the wrong headlights." She nodded and leaned back, eyes open, not sleeping, counting something only she needed to count. Lauren watched her for a moment longer, then opened a blank email to her captain and typed a clean, thin debrief that changed none of the truths and revealed none of the secrets. The plane droned on toward a runway most maps ignored, and for the first time since the rumor surfaced in a voicemail, the story began to settle, not because anyone won, but because everyone who could have bled from it had been wrapped just tightly enough to make it to morning. By morning the story had settled only in the way a bandage settles on a wound, snug enough to keep air out but not tight enough to forget the cut, and the transport bumped down on a desert strip that looked like a service road until the tires caught the groove and the cabin exhaled in one low hiss. Nevada greeted them with pale light and a wind that carried dust more than temperature. A low building sat alone behind a chain-link fence, plain enough to ignore from the highway, built thick enough to stop questions. Sarah stepped off the ramp with a go bag and the small phone in her pocket, denim jacket light without the pin, eyes scanning the horizon because scanning is a habit not a job. Inside, the safe house smelled like new paint and old air conditioners. A clerk with an even voice walked her through basics, meal times, med check, comms windows, restricted perimeter, then pointed her to a room that had a bed, a desk, a lamp, and a laminated card with emergency codes taped inside the drawer. She set the bag down, took the folded note Lauren had handed her, read the grounding script once, and slid it under the lamp. On the other side of state lines, Lauren finished the thin debrief and sat in her captain's office while the order from Coronado clacked out of the printer down the hall, the classification block swallowing the parts of the night that would have made good stories at a bar. She signed what she had to sign, turned over the drive that wasn't hers to keep, and walked to the bullpen, where Torres handed her coffee and a quiet look that said he'd started the safety calls at dawn. Evelyn texted a thank you with no nouns in it. Maria sent one line, "Tell Sarah I got it," meaning the hand anchor, meaning the room wouldn't collapse if she had anything to say about it. Jared wrote a longer message full of apologies and then deleted it and replaced it with, "I slept 3 hours. Didn't run, and sometimes progress is that small and that large at once." Ray went back to the community center before it opened, set out the chairs, lined up the cups, and didn't touch the flyer about stolen valor. When people arrived that night, he said he'd been wrong out loud and didn't dress it up, and when someone flinched at the word wrong he added that being wrong is not the same as being worthless, and the circle held because circles hold when enough hands decide that's their job. Sage stood on a sidewalk across the street, camera zipped in a bag she didn't unzip. She had a draft ready that would catch fire for an hour and then be stomped out again, and she decided not to light it. Instead she slipped inside at break with a stack of clinic numbers and left them on Evelyn's desk with a note that said only, "For anyone who needs extra," and then she went home and wrote a different paragraph, a private one, about how sometimes the most accurate coverage is the part you don't publish. Harrington flew back to Coronado, sat through a meeting where people used phrases like exposure risk and asset migration. And he said what needed saying in short sentences that fit inside the clock. When it was over he stood alone in the corridor and looked out at the water and let his jaw unclench for 4 seconds, then went back to work because the day didn't care about last night's mess. In Nevada, the hours stretched clean and empty. Sarah walked the perimeter path at the allowed times, counted fence posts because routine settles nerves, ran laps in the small gym, and met with a staff therapist who didn't ask for war stories and didn't pretend not to know one when it sat across the table, and that helped. On day 3 she called a number on the small phone and heard Lauren's voice on a secure line rerouted 3 times. "They're okay," Lauren said. "Evelyn's okay, Torres is steady, the room is still a room." "Ray?" Sarah asked. "Showing up," Lauren said. "Every meeting. No speeches unless asked." "Good," Sarah said, and silence did the rest. On day 5 a package arrived with nothing but a paperback on the outside label. Inside were 12 small cards, each with a grounding script handwritten in a different style. Maria said, "Name 5 blue things," in block letters. Jared said, "Count backwards by 7s, slow, with the numbers already started." Evelyn's was a neat list of anchors for nights when the ceiling fan clicked wrong. Sarah spread them on the desk, read each one, put them back in the envelope, and slid it under the lamp with Lauren's note. She slept that night without waking to phantom alarms. Not deep, not long, but clean. Lauren took one more call from a number that wouldn't ID and listened to a voice she recognized from a briefing room she'd never admit she'd been in. The voice thanked her department for procedural discipline and asked her to confirm that all physical and digital copies had been surrendered. She confirmed what she could confirm and kept a single page in her head: 5 people in a basement who breathe better now. Torres drove by Maria's block at the end of his shift more than once, not because he had orders, but because a person in uniform had told a woman in a holding cell that everyone deserves a chance to heal, and it had sounded like a thing worth acting out. Evelyn taught the hand anchor like it had been hers forever. She started each session with a line that was new: "We do hard things in this room, and we do them together," and the group repeated it once, not as a chant but as a reminder. The clip online lived and died in cycles, resurfacing on small feeds, branded fake by loud mouths, defended by quiet ones, and then buried again under something louder and cheaper. The people who needed it had already seen it. The people who would misuse it never got enough to do real damage. That was as much of a win as the day was giving. 2 weeks in, Sarah sat with a relocation officer who slid a manila folder across the table. Inside was a new last name, a new city 4 states away, a job title that paid less than her old one and hurt less too, a small apartment within walking distance of a bus line, and a list of community centers that were always looking for volunteers who could sit still in a hard conversation. "You don't have to take the placement," the officer said. "You can stay a ghost." Sarah tapped the folder once, closed it, and said she'd take the apartment and the bus line and the next Thursday night that needed someone to keep the floor from tilting. She stood, shook the officer's hand, and walked out into the desert light, squinting for a second the way anyone does when they've been inside too long. She didn't look back. Back in California, the circle met on schedule. Lauren stopped by once, sat in the back, didn't flash a badge. She listened to Maria walk Jared through an anchor without prompting, watched Ray catch a chair before it scraped concrete, saw Evelyn set a steady cadence, and she left without introducing herself because the room didn't need her name. Harrington wrote a short note, handwritten on base letterhead, that said only, "Service takes many forms," and mailed it to a P.O. box that would forward twice before landing in a drawer under a lamp in a town that didn't know it was hosting a legend. If there was a lesson, it wasn't dressed for a parade. It sounded like this: courage isn't loud, and truth doesn't always need witnesses. Sometimes the best thing you do with a story is keep it from hurting the people inside it. Sometimes the job isn't to be known, it's to keep others whole. Sarah kept moving, not toward a spotlight but toward another room with folding chairs and bad coffee and a hum in the lights, where a pin on a collar wouldn't matter and a soft voice would say, "You're here. You smell coffee. You hear the fan," and a man who thought he was still in a convoy would come back to his seat, and the night would be a little less heavy for everyone breathing it.